It's like CSPM, but in code security posture management.
Especially when it comes to LLM integrations, the top 3 issues that I'm seeing our customers have are not from some adversarial threat. Like, they are availability, latency, and cost.
Is there any guideline or framework where you can say, okay, security team, this is going to happen in your organization. On the assessment side, here's where you start. I guess you see the sort of like line of thinking, where do I go? What do I do? We're so early, yet we're so late. There's a lot we could say. Do you want to turn this into a spicy debate?
Offensive security and AI security. Yes, offensive security is also another field of security assurance that a lot of us know of and have been using for a long time for pen testing are traditional applications, cloud applications. But what does that look like in the AI world? In this conversation, we had Rob Ragan from Bishop Fox. He spoke about how the world of AI is evolving to the point that now you can even write a bunch of, I want to say, natural language queries to identify if your endpoint that you're testing is actually vulnerable to something. That's basically, I'm going to leave a few links in the show notes as well, so you can actually use those tools yourself and see what kind of offensive security level are possible with the kind of AI that we're working on right now. We also spoke about what does that look like for pen testers in terms of the world we're moving into. What are some of the common examples of LLM implementation people are seeing at this point in time? How pen testers themselves are using LLM, how red teamers are using it, and what does that look like in the real world for pen testers and red teamers right now? They're testing, doing assessments of AI applications or LLM applications. All that and a lot more in this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you enjoy this conversation and if you're probably here for the second or third time, definitely share this with another pen tester or offensive security friend of yours who is interested in AI cybersecurity. And as always, we appreciate a follow and review on your favorite podcast platform or the YouTube of the world. So subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Definitely give us a review or rating if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast as always. I'll see you in the next episode. So yeah, peace. Welcome to another show of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. We have Rob Ragan today. Hey Rob, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Happy to be here.
Could you tell us a bit about yourself? What have you been up to? What's your background in cybersecurity, man?
Yeah, my background is 20 years in IT, ran the gamut of all aspects of everything you can imagine doing, from working my way up from help desk to sysadmin, network admin, then debugging code, then being a software developer, then a web developer, and then working on security products. And then I got my first taste of penetration testing about 15 years ago and realized I wanted to do that all day, every day. And so I've been involved with Bishop Fox ever since. My current role is Principal Technology Strategist, which is a cross-functional role where I get to spend a lot of time with customers, really look at complex problems that they have and develop solutions that might involve us doing multiple things for them, take some of those bigger and grandiose problems that they have back to R&D, work closely with R&D on prototyping solutions, and then also get to work really closely with product management and say, let's take this thing out of R&D, out of the prototype, and figure out how we built it into our overall user experience.
Talking about bigger, grandiose things like AI, cybersecurity these days being bigger and grandiose, maybe a good place to level the playing field, considering you're in that whole assessment, testing, security assurance phase. What is that market for AI at this point in time? Is that even being used at all, or?
It is. We're using it in a variety of different ways. We only have a few things that we've got into production recently, but many more things in prototype. And I'm hearing a lot from others out there in how they're employing it in their day-to-day work, even starting with things like SOW creation for the customer. Can we automate getting that out the door faster, all the way through to where we've been first and foremost focused on is automating some of our steps for large enterprise attack surface discovery. So you have a brand, and then you have all of the mergers and acquisitions of that brand, and all those subsidiaries have domains associated with them. And part of what we do whenever we're onboarding our customers to our attack surface management platform is figure out, does this domain belong to this subsidiary that reports up to the parent brand? But whenever you're looking at things to answer that question, you might be looking at who is information, certificate information, reverse and forward DNS. And there's no consistency in what someone types in whenever they're registering a domain or a certificate. So there might be little variations of the brand, Inc. or the brand, LLC, or without these various punctuations. And one of the quickest things that we saw as a way to get a win was using an LLM to help optimize some of that text evaluation and make it more consistent. And then answer the question, do we think this domain belongs on the allow list to associate with this brand, or should it be on the deny list? And for very large organizations, you might have to do thousands of evaluations like that. And so we saw this as a really great way to automate it.
And I guess people on the other side who reach out to you guys for, hey, assess us for how well we're doing AI or whatever, is that showing up in that part as well, where people are actually working on AI projects as well?
Absolutely. I'd say that we've really launched an entire other methodology that I have helped a lot with spearheading for whenever a customer asks us, hey, I built this LLM integration for customer support, or we have some customers like in the education space. And so they're using it to build chatbots for students and for teachers. And they're also using it for content generation. We have some customers in the financial space. One really interesting one was they're building a financial advisor that generates SQL queries and then executes them. So what could go wrong with that other than everything? And so we often get asked to come in and help take a look at this implementation. And sometimes it's still in the design phase and there's no implementation yet. And so it's more of like threat modeling or architecture design review. Sometimes there is an API and it's just help us test this API. And then this is a little bit more rare at this point, but I think we'll also see folks that are going to be wanting an overall red team of their ML ops. So zooming out from just that individual application, but looking at what does the data science team have access to, or what's the overall infrastructure that's enabling this, and where are there vulnerabilities in that we can build a better incident response plan around.
Caleb and I did a whole season 1 on the whole primer of this as well. I think most of the conversations that I've had in that space have primarily been around that either a lot of people are doing a lot of data projects that are trying to understand what my security thing is. And I don't want to call out any data scientist over here, but they tend to just go, I need access to production data in my non-production environment for some reason, but I'll leave that there. Then there are people who are on the other end where they're doing LLM integrations, where they would have, I'm downloading a, let's just say, uncensored FM from a Hugging Face or whatever. Is there like those kind of ranges as well that you see that are coming up to either for assessment, or are you seeing that yourself in the market as well?
Yeah, seeing that be a question and a concern. Like, for instance, one person I was talking to was saying they were concerned that their data science team was putting sensitive information into OpenAI. I was like, what kind of sensitive information? They have all of our kind of crown jewels data. This was like an investment firm. So they're like, this is all of our due diligence data, all of our data that is for pre-investment and even for post-investment for doing financial analysis on the trajectory of the company. And they said, what can we do? We're worried they're maybe putting this in OpenAI. And I was thinking this isn't a OpenAI problem, but specifically it's why does your data science team have access to all of that sensitive production information? They've probably already accidentally checked it into their personal TensorFlow or personal GitHub, or copied it to the wrong Google Drive, or maybe even emailed some of it accidentally to the wrong person, which is how most breaches happen. And I'm seeing that's, to me, more of let's look at the overall ML ops. And do you have situations where you have production data in places that you shouldn't, in the name of advancing like your data science efforts? And there's just more traditional risks going to be associated with that.
I want to go back a little bit to the assessment scanning part. You're using AI to assess and scan to look for vulnerabilities. This is an area where everyone does things. And I find that the results are usually mediocre at best, right? When we think of scanners and when we think of attack surface and we think of all of these things. So the only way to get reliable data today, I think that makes any sense, is by hiring a high quality, quote unquote, red team, pen testing team, something in order to go and look at what you do. Otherwise, anything automated today basically is, I think, mostly junk. That's my feeling around this. So AI's big promise is, okay, now we can actually do smart things, think like people, and go and assess things. Have you found that is true, at least when it comes to assessment? Are there things here where you're like, wow, I can foresee automated vulnerability scanning starting to get to a place where you no longer rely on super smart skill sets of the person doing your pen test in order to get good results?
So I have had wow moments. I don't think that we're going to see complete automation replace the smart human anytime soon. I think for narrow tasks, there is things that I've seen work that didn't work a year or two ago. And that's been the wow moment for me. I'll give you a few examples. So I actually have been working with a really smart PhD candidate from Stanford that's focused on ML and AI. His name's Hao Chen. And so he came on to work with our team, and we specifically sat down to look at the task of what could we automate using AI in offensive security testing. And I decided to like, let's dream big. Let's go for something that's the holy grail. And that was authentication and authorization testing in a web API. There's no automated scanner that can do this. It doesn't have the context. It doesn't know. And we have been successful in getting this to work in simple cases. And I think where we're getting hung up is more on it understanding more complex web apps and more web APIs and not necessarily offensive security problem. So giving this a vulnerable REST API and saying your task is to try to escalate privileges from the basic user to the admin user. And I've seen this think through the problem and either write scripts or just bang on the API with curl commands until it gets enough context of what it should try that a real human would try. And I've even seen it do things like skip ahead, like it looked like it was behaving like lazy, like a human would, where it's like, oh, I'm going to try to iterate this ID. I'm just going to skip ahead. It's not doing anything different after I iterated it a few times to see if I get a different response. And I've seen this be successful. And that to me that never existed before this past year. And so that's been a wow moment for me.
So just to be accurate here, without any context, you just said, here's an API. You need to test to see if you can be a normal user or escalate yourself to an admin user.
Just a primer prompt using GPT-4 and then the prompt of what its goal was with that specific app. And yes, successfully 80% of the time, like getting in.
And so this is like basically saying that what's fascinating is it's bringing methodology. It's
Mhm.
thinking, so AI is now bringing the methodology. I don't have to specifically tell you, oh, test API for this, try for
Mhm.
this exact method, then do this method. It's basically just doing it on its own and figuring it out.
Yes, this is the breakthroughs. I don't know what the input's going to be exactly, but I have a code wrapped in this model that is going to be prompted to try and figure it out and have a success rate that is significantly better than where
Do
we
you,
were with any other automation.
do you have to tell it the exact tools and utilities it has access to?
Nope.
No, it just
Okay.
does it. It just says, I need this, and it just runs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this case, it was primarily just using curl and evaluating the response and then able to make determinations of this is the parameter I should try to manipulate. This user ID parameter is what I'm going to try to tamper with. And it's trying different variations of tasks based on its like initial primer prompt that it thinks are related to offensive web application security testing. And it is able to get to the result in a few tries and failures and then adapting and overcoming the situation.
Were you using any sort of popular framework like Open Interpreter or Crew?
I
No.
have dabbled with others, but in this case, and this project's openly available. If you want to check it out, it's Pentest Muse, pentestmuse.ai. And then there's a GitHub associated with it, and it's open source. So feel free to check it out. It is remarkably a pretty simple for loop with some fancy prompts and just access to the terminal to be able to run curl and any other commands available from the CLI.
I have found most of these to be that basically, yeah, it is exactly that. Like even like Open Interpreter is just a loop, just turning it and tuning the prompts to be more specific in its output. And then that's it. That's pretty much all it does. And
Yeah.
recursively just does it.
And I think things like that, where it's able to write its own code to solve a more complex problem, becomes really powerful. That's where I've used things like the Microsoft AutoGen framework. And I found with this, like how it was prompted was key to its success and breaking down the tasks. So the user, the human that's leading this automation, still had to understand enough about how to break the complex task down into steps that were discrete enough that the AI could write its own code to solve those and build upon each step to get to whatever desired outcome. That's hence why I think this is a really good like augmentation tool, especially if you have to do this maybe many times. Let's say you're tasked with testing thousands of API endpoints, and to grind through that manually would be very time consuming, very tedious. But if you can build some framework where that augments you, that is taking care of some of these tasks and also being, I thought one of the key tenets of what we should be striving to do is to be very transparent and creating a very detailed log about what did and what didn't happen so that we can establish some type of trust of this is the coverage, this is what actually got tested, this is what happened, and this is what didn't happen, and this is what would still be left to a human to go figure out. And I think that's going to be an important element of solving this problem is having the transparency to know like what actually went on.
Give me an example, like to any pen tester or bug bounty person today, what is the absolute no brainer thing that they should implement using AI right now?
I think IDOR. So that's what we went after basically for authorization testing. And here is a query string parameter that looks like an identifier or a number. Here is some endpoint that I can tamper with this number and have an AI try to determine if it got a different response back enough that it got some unauthorized access to something that it shouldn't be able to. And this is something that traditional automation and traditional scanners, it was really challenging to write some type of signature based check for this. But to have an AI be able to interpret, did I get access to something based on the context of the page and the user role that I am and what I know about the app? I think this is a very ripe area for this type of automation.
And you use Pentest Muse for this, right? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Is that the one from Abstract Engine? I just found a link, which is Abstract Engine Pentest Muse CLI.
That's the one.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link for that into the show notes as well when we get to that as well. But that's pretty awesome. It's funny. I think a lot of the conversation that Caleb and I've been having is the fact that we're not there, at least in terms of having a smarter AI. But just to clarify, this is at the point of, can I get in is the question is being answered. It's not trying to get in. It just can validate almost like a reconnaissance, for lack of a better word. It can do a recon enough to know that, hey, there is a possibility to get in. This is how you would do it, rather than I'm getting in. So that people don't get scared and go, oh, we are at the Terminator point now.
No, I definitely don't think we're at the Terminator point. I think that this is still very much like guided by an expert. I think we're going to be in this phase for a while where we're building this bridge between what the human is good at, human expert, and what the machine is good at. And finding that balance of you still have to have someone lead these efforts and guide it to achieve the desired outcome. I don't think we're at a point where we can just throw an automation at something and it completely figures out what we intended to happen. That's where I think we'll be for the foreseeable future, maybe the next few years.
I really think Copilot is really the right name, right? Everything is augmented. This is about augmentation. We're at how long are we going to be in augmentation phase before we get into just pilot phase?
Yeah. And so we actually also maybe think of another test case that we've gone down, which is source code review, and found that finding particular types of authentication and authorization vulnerabilities at the source code level, this same techniques applied really well, which is something like a traditional static analysis tool doesn't have the context, doesn't know enough about what's going on in the code to really flag those types of issues very well, or doesn't have checks written that are specific to that application of what would be an access control bypass. However, we found that applying the same kind of technique that we did to an API to source code review, we were finding these types of IDOR issues or these types of mass assignment issues or things with a really high true positive rate to say, these are the exact lines of code that are vulnerable. This is a snippet of it rewritten to look like it would be secured, or here's the remediation and the fix for it. There may be this really good opportunity to blend those both. I think that this approach of doing the dynamic analysis and the static analysis on the app and having different agents document what they're observing and report that up maybe to an overseer agent that could help connect the dots between not only did I find this in the code, but I'm really sure you should care about fixing it because I also found a path to exploiting it in the API. And here's my report, my analysis up to the human expert that's going to make some decision on whether or not to assign this to an engineer to actually fix.
Man, I remember that idea being brought up such a long time ago.
Yeah.
Was that your first startup by any chance?
Can I also bring up another idea that I had a long time ago that I still haven't seen? I wish static code analysis or code analyzers in general, right now, I feel are too specific about just finding vulnerabilities. And I hope in the world of AI, I think this is very possible, where I want this to be more about what does the code consist of? How does it work? What's the architecture? These are the kinds of things that I feel like are more useful and I haven't seen a lot of focus on, which it's not about find me this vulnerability. It's about saying, hey, show me where all the calls go to a database and which databases, how many databases, which ones go to an API, what APIs, how many APIs, how many main application processing code logics or things that what's the architect of my code really look like? Which part of my code is a core part of my code, but no one changes? It's like CSPM, but in code. Core security posture management.
Core security posture management.
Yeah. But it's not even about security. It's just about how it works and what it does and how it's being managed. I think it's almost like you got to have that basis to say, this is what the code is. And then you overlay on top of that the vulnerabilities and where they're located at. And actually, if you have that prior foundation, it feels like you could find more relevant and more hard to detect issues on top of that.
Yeah, and not just find them, but just go suggest fixes for them. I think like that's going to be the leap that basically can create, which a lot of security testing is really just advanced QA testing. So you're talking about having a really good definition of what would make quality product, what would be the business requirements, why did the developers and engineers even build it this way, how does it actually work in this implementation, and then what are the security objectives and security requirements that we should map to those business requirements, and then let's just generate security unit testing code. Let's write other code that does it pass, fail, does this function, or does this class, or does this part of the code, if I start at a code level sending security unit tests to it, does it pass or fail those? And if it fails, let's go dig into why and actually implement the fix. I think that's the opportunity that we have in front of us with these tools is we don't need to report more issues. We can actually just work on fixing them.
Yeah, like this thing should be able to tell you right away, oh, I noticed that you have 3 different versions of authentication libraries, and here are those libraries. And I will auto-generate the unit tests for what we should expect out of those libraries. Like that, to your point, it's almost like it's less about the security and more about what is the hardest part of a new engineer starting a new job. It's figuring out what the damn code does.
And how to contribute.
Yeah, and how to and what part is what and where does it go here? I should just be able to start as an engineer and immediately says, okay, what you're looking at here is the authentication library. There are 3 different versions that I've seen. The 2 most popular versions that seem to have the most contributions and issues in our code are this one and this one. The code you're looking at here in the overall architecture of things has to do with customers writing to data sets. Like you can get all of this context and understanding without doing a thing. I feel like that is where AI and code should go. And vulnerabilities is just a feature of that sort of functionality.
It's funny, I think so. We had this conversation on the previous episode around the whole we should bring back QA testers to like, no, kind of QA disappeared as a field. We're talking about this in the last episode about, to Kayla's point, if the overall quality of the code is good, technically there should not be a vulnerability. If the quality is good, then everything should just work. Apart from any business logic flaw, we're not looking at really any vulnerability come through. I'm curious from a perspective of, I don't, to your point about pen testing is specialized QA, I would say, do you find that most of the integrations or M integration, are there any examples of LM integration you're saying? Because I guess one side is a pen tester would be, to Caleb's point, knowing what is it, how am I doing this? I can just use natural language to come up with, am I in a state where I can log into this box and it's vulnerable versus what are some of the things you're seeing in the other organizations from an LLM perspective? Or for what does a stack look like when someone comes at you, hey, Rob, we need some pen test on my AI machine or whatever. What are these components that you guys are looking at this point? Because even that's a black box for a lot of people.
Yeah, to your first point, I think that why QA went away is it was really hard, I think, to recruit and retain anyone that had a high level of talent. And we're talking about like the type of tester that needs to be able to write code to test other code and things along those lines. And if you can do that, there was more demand for you to just be going into a role where you're being a software engineer and you're building. And what I am seeing at some of the most advanced tech companies that we work with is more of a merger of the security engineering role and the SRE role. The folks that are the best site reliability engineers also have a strong awareness of security issues because those can affect the reliability of their system. Especially when it comes to LLM integrations, the top 3 issues that I'm seeing our customers have are not from some adversarial threat. Like they are availability, latency, and cost. If there's some third party that they're relying on and that third party goes away or has a high amount of latency during like peak hours during the day, but they were relying on that for some production process, that 20 or 30 second delay is killing their user experience, or that it just not being available for a few hours and having no backup plan or having no other third party to switch to puts them dead in the water. And then the other thing where cost is becoming an element of it is they hurried up and rushed this to production, but had no plan for what if someone wrote a bot against this API and is just hammering this. And now we drew up our costs for token generation really high this month. And so those are the top 3 incidents that I've seen our customers have when it comes to like problems that they're worried about mitigating.
Yeah, nothing about security.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I don't know how much of an edge case these are. Like I keep reading about these. So there's a one where any functional model download, say if you do a download from Hugging Face, which is what used to happen with containers, where Docker Hub, everyone's downloading this public repository, no idea what's inside it. Similar things that are happening with whether it's uncensored or censored functional models you might download from somewhere. Let's just say Hugging Face. Not that I'm sure Hugging Face is doing a good job or whatever they do, but if for whatever reason the model that you're downloading is able to execute code or is able, you just basically download and start using without, I do a container scan. Oh, I guess it's not vulnerable, so it should be fine. But I feel also there is a gap in knowing what's inside a functional model or how an LLM operates as well. Do you feel like is that something that is obvious in the industry where now just you go, it's like, it's not me, I'm just going to leave it there?
Yeah, no, it's not obvious. And I think that people are looking for help with that. A couple of open source projects that I've found that have really been integral to our methodology. And one is designed to work with a model in an offline capacity like that, like download it from Hugging Face or just wherever and locally fuzz it. That project is called Garak, RAK.
Yeah.
And this is a really good way to basically fuzz for a lot of common issues with a model that you may want to create essentially like the security unit tests for and have a pass fail on. Like, can I get it to generate toxic output, like toxicity level? Can I get it to return its primer prompt? Can I get it to basically go through all of the common use cases that from a security testing perspective, you'd want to say, is this model susceptible for this? And it also has a percentage of pass fail attempts. What's your threshold for it responding this way? Is it okay if it's like less than 10% of the time? Maybe still ship it to production? Or this, I think, is a really helpful tool for testing each iteration of the model. And then a newer one that just came out is through the Azure Red Team, Pyrit, Pyrit. This is a framework that could be retrofitted to work with an online API. And you essentially would write code that can implement these types of tests and give it specific criteria of what you're trying to do to red team an LLM integration API. And at that point, like this becomes, oh, this is meant to detect like credit card fraud. And I want to actually, that's my use cases. I want to implement like what I would be looking for to try to get this to be defrauded. And then it's going to generate, also using an LLM, different attack cases in different scenarios to fuzz that API.
This is a good topic going back to the assessment that when we talk about LLM security, it feels like most of the conversation, 98% of the conversation has always been focused on some proxy blocking something or another solution, right? But very little talks about the actual testing, like using something like Garrick or others and saying, hey, as part of your testing phase, you should run this, and this will cover both identifying bad behavior, ensuring good security against prompt injection and where you stand, even things like, to your point on this thing, hey, red teaming the APIs on it. There's not been anything, at least I know of, maybe Rob, of, is there anything that says, hey, in AI and LLM, this is the assessment portion and process and framework to think of?
I haven't seen anything that is like really breaks it down because just like any application, it's very application specific. So I've been trying to form my own methodology for this and actually even tried to work backwards from what would I want to see as an output of that methodology? What are the types of findings? What are the types of issues that our team should be looking for when we're asked to test these? So I actually published a list of 15 LLM integration findings. They're open source. I wanted to share these with the community and have other people be able to contribute, to tell us what's missing, tell us like what else should be in there from a mitigations and remediations recommendations perspective. And some of these may even seem like more related to traditional software engineering issues, which they are, because at some point your LLM touches your traditional software and that integration point might be the vulnerability or the weak point that we need to call out. And some of these might be informational. They might just be more of a best practice. But ultimately, I wanted to say, if you're going to test, you're basically proving if this is an issue or not. And even the rate limiting is probably going to be one of the most common that we report because you don't want like a bot banging on your LLM endpoint causing issues. So that's going to be something that we'll probably be reporting on a lot of these that we test for the foreseeable future. But how you actually get to this can be, it's more, what are the tools? What are the techniques? What's your arsenal of attacks and payloads? But that then needs to be prescribed on an application specific basis of what's the threat model for this app and what do we care about most? Is it a customer support agent and you do care about toxic output? Or is it something that's one that we were testing a couple of weeks ago was generating JSON output? So that doesn't apply. So it's still very application specific, and you need to tailor your test accordingly.
So is there anything like, obviously an enterprise is going to go, hey, we're going to go produce both customer facing LLM API endpoint, let's say example, a chatbot, and we're going to produce an internal customer facing, let's say a wiki search, maybe even an IT. Is there any guideline or framework where you can say, okay, security team, this is going to happen in your organization. On the assessment side, here's where you start, right? Okay, you have endpoints, you have this thing. Is a generic answer. I know the answer in terms of you need a threat model, but what's the right way to threat model an LLM? How do you think about it? Is it the same? Is it different? Do I run Garrick? Even if I create a threat model, is Garrick the right tool to use? Is there any other tool to use depending on my threat model? I guess you see the sort of like line of thinking, where do I go? What do I do?
In a lot of cases, we've been just asked to test the API. I wish we were getting asked to test the offline model. So we can't even often run Garrick in the cases where we're brought in. I've just been recommending that to teams because they don't want to give us a copy of their model just as yet another third party that would have had access to it. So I think that in a lot of cases, it is taking the same structure and the same format as here's an API, here's an application that we need tested. Happy to think through with you what are the abuse cases that we're most worried about, but tell us what you can make it do because we're not sure. So actually in that case where we were testing it was an app that's designed to help you edit videos, actually like for if you're a podcaster or if you're making some social media content. And it would let you paste in your summary of what you thought the video was about, but then it would summarize that further and generate like a JSON output to be able to move the meta tags into that content of that video that you're uploading to whatever other platform. But we actually got it to do like a text replacement issue. Every time like a word was mentioned, it would return like instructions on how to build a bomb for that entire tenant and for all other users in that tenant. And so that was like an abuse case that we were just pointing out to the customer of this is something that from an architecture perspective, you're probably going to want to isolate this just to that user or have some way to avoid this occurring in that, which could be like passing the input into the quarantine LLM that segments it before the privileged LLM generates the JSON output that goes into the.
So the answer to my generic question is basically there's not a lot.
No, it's still tailored case by case.
It's so tailored. There's not. What do you do? This is again, man. We're so early, yet we're so late. It's an interesting challenge of okay, even on the assessment side, which should be easy, to just define some framework and standard for this. This doesn't exist.
I didn't think it made sense to make a completely new like service line or methodology from scratch. I really do think that this maps quite well to like traditional application security testing methodologies. And it's just what are the exact tools, techniques, and steps that the tester's taking, or like what findings are they looking for that are net different. But to me, I didn't think it made sense to warrant its own unique service because there's still like fundamental AppSec issues that are going to occur with these implementations.
It's just the way you're interfacing with them is different.
But I guess the difference would also be the fact that if you are trying to build your own LLM, then you're managing the entire stack. Then you're in a bit more of to what you said, maybe a traditional environment for some time, someone may be using Python or Juniper or Jupyter, whatever it's called, the notebook. In those scenarios as well, are we still, because to what Caleb said, or start doing a threat model, we're still applying the same kind of concept for threat modeling in terms of what threats are available and where the data is. Maybe data is a new element in there. Even if you're building your own LLM instead of using a third-party one, is that still the same use case where we're still early and late at the same time?
I would recommend starting with what is your specific implementation? What is it doing for the business? And then let's actually think through what attacks are we most worried about for that. And let's break that down into then what tests do we need to run to verify if it's going to be affected by those attacks? What configuration does it need to be in to mitigate the risk of those attacks? And what's your incident response plan for if one of those attacks succeeds? Like, do you have a plan even at the legal level or the rest of the organization level? And this is just basically the same you would do for any application issue.
Yeah, it's funny I mentioned incident response because I think people haven't figured out incident response in public cloud as well. That's a lever to play. I mean, it's like we're talking another leap after that as well. But I'm surprised. I think either one of you did not mention the OWASP top 10 for how every time we talk about pen testing or AppSec, everyone's 10 OWASP top 10. Now, OWASP does have a top 10 for LLM. And neither of you mentioned it. I'm curious if it's because you guys don't believe it's relevant anymore with how fast AI has gone, or as only some parts of it are relevant. Rob, you'll go first. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this as well, man.
Yeah, I know some folks that help contribute to developing that. I think that there is some utility for it. I thought that the remediation recommendations and mitigation recommendations weren't practical enough to be
Mm.
recommending. And that's why I went down the path of what is the list of issues that I'm looking for and that our team should look for, and developed our own top 15 that may look like they're intersecting with other things that aren't LLM specific, but it's because those will still be issues in these integrations and in these implementations. So that's why I haven't been referencing it. I think maybe it was a bit rushed out in its first version, and I think they're working on another version already, but
Yeah.
that's where my stance is on it.
Like, it's hard because I have to put on two hats. I put on the hat as sort of someone who understands a little bit more about AI security than most. And then I also put on the hat of I don't know anything at all. And if I put on the hat of I understand a little bit about AI security, I'm like, yes, it's good to start at least looking at these things and ranking them in some order that says what's most practical. Being able to go and say, hey, here are a quote unquote top 10, I think is good. However, as an expert, how do we even get to a top 10? It's so early. How do you even know what a top 10 really is? Like, how do we rate it? Are we rating it by a number of attacks we've seen in the wild? Are we rating it just on someone's view of this is more relevant than the other? I think it's just very difficult as an expert to say, oh, like in this current time, like this is a top 10 and here's why I rank them this way. To Rob's point, as someone who knows a little bit more, I'm like, it seems a little rushed. It seems like almost what's going on with this. But if I put on the, okay, I don't know anything about what's going on, it's nice to at least say, I've been following OWASP top 10 for AppSec.
Yeah.
Therefore, I know what the top 10 for LLMs is. Therefore, if my company is saying, hey, we need to solve for these problems, then at least I know someplace to go that I quote unquote trust, right? Because everybody and their brother is producing some sort of LLM AI security thing. Listen, if I trust my OWASP AppSec stuff to top 10, then I will go and say, okay, this is my top 10 for LLM, and that's what
Yeah.
I will focus on. However, I also notice that I don't know what to do about it. Like, I think that's the problem. Great, here are these top 10 things, but how do I solve any of these? There's no real solution to these things. And
No.
so I'm also in this aspect of, okay, great, now what is the thing? And the other aspect so one, I want to applaud that they went and did it. And I think
Mm.
like them trying to help. But the other time I'm also finding, at what point do we also start thinking about producing these things is more confusing and more negative than helpful? Because the other part that I feel is a challenge is the biggest challenge with security teams and CISOs right now is the unknown. And the more you name attacks and the more attacks you throw out there, the more fear that it induces in an area that I don't understand. And then my natural reaction to everything is I still don't understand it. There's a top 10, there's all these attacks, just block it. At this point, there's not enough for me to know what to do. I would rather see a more measured approach moving forward. I'd like to see, guys, we've only seen one or these two or three. Maybe we don't need a top 10. Maybe we just need a top three, right? At this early in the market. Like these are the things that really matter. We're seeing them in the wild. This is the kind of impact it's going to add. This is the kind of things you need to worry about. That I would much rather see than I think a top 10. So I'd love to see that as a measured approach moving forward.
I agree on the
This is
whole.
a spicy view, by the way. So I
Mhm.
don't know.
To be fair, and I must disclose it. So I was part of the first version as well. And I do agree there's a hard deadline. Everyone wanted to contribute as much and as quickly as possible as well. So there was a lot of discussion as well. But the challenge with doing anything committee like, where you have more than 10 people, everyone with an opinion, and now that you put a timeline of, hey, we have to produce this in a month. Oh, shit. Like hearing everyone's opinion and somehow making everyone agree on a one point in the matter of a month is not easy. So I would definitely credit the person who drove the entire thing and came up with version 1 to at least have something out there. But to Caleb's point, I initially used to think that maybe it is a good thing for people who are following the OWASP concept internally and it helps them start. Over the past couple of days, I've been having conversations with some companies here in the UK. It's been really interesting. The whole thing about blocking with at proxy level for AI. I joined some of those companies. They have a lot of use cases internally for AI that they're working on using LLMs. It may have just started happening because that's how fast things are happening, I guess. People have started going to the point that, hey, if you have a use case in AI, because a lot of people have been doing big data projects for a while. So it's not that AI is a big thing. It was a big thing before as well. I think the whole Gen AI and LLM has made it even more like an explosion in people's face. Now, a lot more Gen AI use cases than a regular use case, I feel now. But what they are referring to is that the whole approach of let's block all AI is limited to what we used to call shadow IT. Now it's like shadow AI, for lack of a better word. People are trying to prevent shadow AI. Hey, if you have a use case, let's talk about it because you still need actual production data for it. What would that look like? And the security makes a framework and all of that. I would have thought things like OWASP Top 10 to what Caleb and you guys are saying, that it helps, but it doesn't help in the context of what do I do with this? Like I have a list, but it may not apply to everything because by now, when the top 10 LLM was made, there was no Hugging Face. There was no AI agents. Like a lot of these concepts did not even exist back then. So we're late and we're early at the same time to what Caleb was saying. And they did good for what that time was. But because how fast these things are going, I feel like that has expired.
Yeah, I think it's a hard play. I'll give you an example. I'm doing the CSA's Security Alliance. And okay, so what is the point of what I'm doing? The point of what I'm doing, the reason why it was even created was because I felt there's a lack of practical advice and frameworks for security teams specifically to look at in order to go deploy, test, manage, right? That's the real reason. This group is not about safety. It's not about ethics or behavior. This is truly about, hey, I have prompt injection. Is that a problem? And what do I do about it? Or I want to threat model an AI. How do I even start? Where do I even go? Or I'm a red teamer and I'm not sure how my job changes because of AI. These are all the kinds of questions that are more practical and real. So I wanted to go and create that. Now you're dealing with thousands of people who are volunteers in this, with executive committees, with very experienced and well-known individuals who also want to do this. And the goal is you want to produce something that matters. You want to do it quickly, but it's got to be valid and make sense. That's a hard job. So I imagine OWASP and Top 10 deals with that same exact problem. And the other things you don't want to do is I don't want to produce something. Everyone's producing their framework and their guidance. And I actually don't want to produce another one on top of something else just because it's a name. Oh, CSA needs to produce one or Caleb needs to produce one. No, actually, I would much rather go to OWASP and work with them on making theirs even better rather than creating another version of that. So I think in a new industry where everyone's trying to answer those questions and trying to create their ability to help solve some problem, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to step on other people's toes. And that's just the nature of the beast. And being able to do it in something that matters and does it well with so many people involved is very challenging. So
I actually think the guidance that NVIDIA and Microsoft have put out has been the most advanced and goes into as much detail about how to think about testing these systems. Obviously, because they have the most resources to put into this type of effort compared to a volunteer organization. And they have experts that are solely focused on how is Microsoft using this, how's NVIDIA using this, and they're going deep on that topic. So I've actually found some of their guidelines and the Pirate tool from Azure is, in my opinion, the most advanced framework for how to test these implementations that I've seen so far.
Going back to Caleb's example about how is this changing? Because obviously you're in this space and trying to do the security assurance part as well. Do you feel it's already changing the way a red teamer has to operate? Because people are throwing millions of dollars at figuring out what this AI thing could be. Do you already see signs of this changing the roles as it stands today for red teamers and otherwise?
I've heard that from our customers. I had one that their entire roadmap got derailed and was basically like, drop everything else you're doing, shift to making sure that we have a chatbot by this deadline. And then the internal security team was like, okay, I have this new skill to learn. I need to learn how to test this. Now, they had some time because they were given early versions of it and they're like, this doesn't even work. It doesn't do anything yet. Like it's completely broken. So I can't really find problems with it. But yeah, I think that was I've seen that happen at a couple of places so far.
And you find that your role as someone who's from the offensive side of the world, is that already changing as well?
Yeah, it always changes. This is part of the fun of the role. It's another technology and it's another thing to learn. And that's something that I think most pen testers that really love what they do, love that it doesn't stay the same. They're when Cloud came out, there was a whole lot of new things to learn.
Yeah.
It's like this, there's a whole lot of new things to learn. And I think that's an appeal of the job is it doesn't stay static.
Yeah, because I was thinking about people who are listening in, maybe coming from an offensive side perspective. I think as much as we've called out that there is no standard, because there's no CIS benchmark for AI. There is no, I think you could probably do a container scan if you're using Kubernetes for you're building your LLMs. But beyond that, I think Caleb said this earlier, where the 98% of the stack, I guess you should be able to find out most of it by using a threat model. But primarily it's the same job, it's just basically it's a different technology now.
Yep.
We have to talk about Claude 3 that just got announced. Did you guys know this? Did you? Yeah.
I didn't see this.
A couple hours ago, Claude 3 just got announced. Way better numbers than both GPT-4 as well as Gemini 1.5. The claims. And what I also love about these podcasts is I instantly date the podcast by introducing things that are supposedly new news.
Not only what? Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, wait. So actually, for context for people who may be listening, what is Cloud?
Anthropics.
Yes,
AI.
it's their model.
It is multimodal in the fact that you can now upload documents and things like that, which it wasn't able to do before, but still can't. It doesn't have a sort of Dolly version or
image generation.
Yeah, no image generation yet. But it looks like the actual text stuff is at least claiming very good numbers. So that's going to be, in fact, the one that actually caught my eye that looked like the most interesting to test is GPT-4 in code generation has 67% on the test. Claude 3 zero shot is claiming 84.9%.
Or 84.9 is
what so based off of their human eval test. So on the social are talking about how it is answering reasoning questions that have not been able to be answered before. So
I think this is like the Wild West as well, right? I think as we shoot an episode, and Rob, probably you've seen this in your space as well, you talk to someone and you have a plan, you're going forward, and next thing you know, Cloud 3 comes in, oh shit, like everything we had from an LLM attack perspective was basically based on Cloud 2 or 1 or whatever. Now it's completely different. There's a lot more tokenization space, or whatever you want to call it. Are you seeing this at your space as well? There's almost, yes, it's in technology, but we're always behind, seems like.
Yeah, I think there's this chance to say, what am I going to commit to using? Who am I going to partner with from a third-party perspective? Or perhaps have multiple partners and have that backup plan for if one isn't working or one day I need to have something else to go to. And the thing is, though, is you can, it's, I think just as much as we've seen people go down this path with their traditional software engineering of I'm going to be releasing, the most mature places are releasing many times a day. I think we're going to see how often am I going to update the model that I'm using? And right now I'd say we're in a very immature state of that, of it's not going to be a very high frequency because I don't have a good way to test if it's still going to work the same way as it did yesterday, if I switch to a new model. And so there's going to be this demand, I think, for what's the test suite to answer that question of should I upgrade and what am I going to break if I do?
Great question. Man, it's just such a fascinating space of where we are.
Yeah, and to feel that we're not even scratching the surface. It's almost, I don't know, the internet is just being formed in a space where people are like, what else is a possibility here? We don't know. We'll figure out as we go. Cloud 3 is here. Oh shit, like Cloud 4.5. Whatever the next comes in. And another thing that came up in the conversation, probably worthwhile for the audience and good to hear your perspective as well. So someone I was talking to who's building LLM models in their organization, we were talking about how if you are a regulated industry and you're trying to build your own LLM, the model you may use, so most people are going for managed LLMs as well. No one wants to build their own LLM. The ones who are going for it, even if you use a cloud service provider to build yours, there's a whole multi-model, multi-tenant versus single-tenant or concept that people are forgetting because you're using a third party to begin with, but then there is a whole, I think Azure is single-tenant, but the two, AWS and Google, are multi-tenant. And I don't know if you guys were aware of this or we don't even talk about that at all here.
We did. We talked about it actually very early. We made predictions around would people prefer to do hosted or are they all going to do
managed,
and it was pretty obvious. It was like, why would anyone there's so much work in doing this. It's creating your own cloud. So it's similar. Yeah, you remember we did talk about this. Yeah.
We spoke about the fact where it was going to be more managed. But whether each provider would take the path that, for example, for Microsoft, take the path that they're only single tenant, not multi-tenant. At least I think my understanding is they're still single tenant only, whereas Amazon and Google are saying we are multi-tenant, so take it or leave it thing. I don't know if that approach is something that anyone would have predicted, but I don't know.
It depends on some of these models that are open source that are very capable. It is not unreasonable to just download that and use it in like a local capacity or put it on any other kind of server that you might host in the cloud. So for our path and our stack and our pipeline, so to speak, we have OpenAI instance in Azure that we use, and that's where we're doing some of our initial production work, but we're already looking at for things that we think might become like high cost. If we throw like a Mixtral model on an M3 Ultra and just give everyone in our company the ability to access that from a local perspective, that might be the way to optimally do some of these things. And yeah, I think there'll be a mix. I think there'll be use cases for, I'm going to pay for the hosted version, I'm going to pay for the managed version, or if the use case is right, it's not unreasonable to have a local model and pretty capable to host that yourself these days.
Thanks so much for your time, Rob. That's like the other end of my tech questions, unless there's Claude 4 out by now. Like, you never know, man. It's going so fast. It could be 4 right now.
My one question to Rob is, what really excites you now?
I'm most excited about the idea of agents that are writing their own code to solve their problems. Like, I'm just getting really pumped whenever I have something that I personally want to do. And it feels like a superpower to me that I've been in meetings where I used Open Interpreter to generate a graph of analyzing some data where we didn't have to like wait to have another meeting about this or wait until someone had some time to do some business analytics. I was like, no, I'm just going to have the AI right now take the data from this API, generate a graph, and show it to everyone. And that took me like 10 minutes to do. And that feels like a superpower. That's just delegating this task to an assistant that writes the code and gets the job done in a matter of minutes. And the more I've embraced that, the more I'm like, this is it. This is like how I'm like augmented now.
Awesome.
Do you guys feel like we're in a world where like the whole self-driving car? I don't know if you guys have sat into one of those in your day. Like that the unsettled feeling you get when you sit in one of those, you almost want to hold the steering wheel. I feel like how many people who would use the agents, whether it's code interpreter or others, they're like, how many of them would resist the urge to accept the answer? Because it's funny. The reason I bring that up is because I was talking to a CISO who is a CISO for a university, and we're talking about threat models for whatever reason, and they're trying to work on data projects. And hopefully no professors are listening to this, but I don't think they would be. But if the idea was the stakeholders that they have to deal with is professors and people like, hey, you need a complex password, they would almost feel it as if you're questioning their intelligence because they're already so smart doing all these things and you want me to have a complex password. I remember all my passwords for things. I feel like the LLM model and stuff is very similar where some people are like, no, I don't need this. I am super good at what I do. I'm curious. We'll get to that phase as well, where all of us, or a majority of us, may be on that band, but there'll be a few professors or data scientists who be just going, nah, I'm still better than this. Graph, great. I can make better graph myself. It's still not the human touch I need.
Yeah, I think everyone adapts to change differently. And some people will certainly resist, but I'm all for it. I want all the help I can get. I want the best tool available.
That definitely makes the three of us waiting for, hopefully we get to a point where beyond the co-pilot stage, get to a pilot stage. But Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you on the internet, man, just to connect with you? And
connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best. Rob Ragan on LinkedIn, and then Sweep That Leg on X. And those are probably the best two places.
Awesome. I'll leave those in the comments as well. But dude, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing your experience with us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you are wondering why aren't we covering all topics, because maybe the field is evolving too quickly, so we may not even know some of the topics we have not covered. If you know of a topic that we should cover on AI Cybersecurity Podcast or someone we should bring as a guest, definitely email us on info@cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, which reminds me, we have a sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, where we talk about everything cloud security with leaders. Similar to the AI cybersecurity conversation, we focus on cloud security specifically in the public cloud environment at cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, which if you find helpful, definitely check out www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. Have a great one. Peace.